The Canadian GP saw the first 1-2 of the year for the team. I'm here now with Chief Strategist James Vowles to talk about how things unfolded. So James, it was a very exciting start to the race. What happened with Verstappen?
Verstappen had a huge impact on the race. Positively for us to a certain extent, negatively for Ferrari. You saw that incredible start, putting Valtteri in a position where actually he lost out behind Verstappen, ended up P3 and locked up into turn 2, which had an impact on his race later on, and clipped Vettel on the way through, which damaged his front wing and his barge board region, which compromised his race ultimately. We highlighted beforehand that Red Bull were going to form a key part of the race, and they did. And it would have been very tough for Valtteri to pick up the P2 slot back from Verstappen later on, but there's a number of different strategic options that would have led to a good, successful race.
So the two drivers had very different strategies throughout the race, and you mentioned Bottas' lock-up. What happened there?
So Valtteri locked up into turn 2 at the beginning of the race, and we have the ability on the car to understand how much damage that's caused overall and what the risks are. We were happy there's no significant risk, but Valtteri couldn't see much. I mean, when you lock up a tyre, the car is vibrating a huge amount, and there is, over time, a risk of failure. When we got with Valtteri to around about lap 23 or so, we were happy that we were in a secure position for P2 of the race, but equally there were concerns over that reliability of the tyre, and we decided to box the car. Now, a couple of things. Soft tyre, and that's the big difference you were talking about. We fitted the soft to Valtteri. Ricciardo had the soft behind him. We were one of the very few cars to try this on Friday and found that it worked quite well on our car. It definitely gave the ability to go to the end of the race without any risk. 23 was a little bit on the earlier side, and on Ricciardo's car it's performing well, so the car behind you was on the same tyre, so we decided to do the same thing with Valtteri and to get him to the end of the race. He dropped out behind Esteban, as you saw. In an ideal world we would have kept going to around about lap 30 and taken super soft, but we were slightly compromised by that start. And
how different was Lewis' strategy compared to Valtteri's?
So both on a one-stop, and in fact the whole field was on a one-stop, but with Lewis, we had the opportunity now to wait for a real optimum one-stop window, which is around about lap 32 or so. He started to get a huge amount of backmarker traffic after that point in time, so we brought him in on lap 32, fitted the super soft to the end. The super soft was the fastest of the two tyres. With where Valtteri was, he would have been faster overall had he had the super soft, but it's a longer stint. And for Lewis, very straightforward race. He just needed to manage that to the end.
So by contrast to Valtteri and Lewis, Grosjean had suffered damage and pitted on lap 1 and went to the end of the race on those tyres. Did you expect that at all?
It's an interesting strategy, and they did a good job with it. He was obviously caught up in the melee early on, involving Sainz and Massa and Grosjean as well at the same time. And fitting the super soft was the right thing for them to do. We had highlighted it could just do the whole race, but it's an unknown. Whilst you understood that maybe from early on the weekend, the track temperature was 46 degrees in the race, quite a bit warmer than we'd experienced. And he did a very good job managing it and had a very good race with it overall. So considering how compromised he was, great decision by them.
Looking at Kimi's race, who had a very interesting day, he actually didn't pit during the virtual safety car, but waited until afterwards.
Yeah, it's an interesting race for Kimi. And it's an interesting tactical element what came out here. So Kimi right now under that virtual safety car, under the first lap of it he still had traffic behind, but a number of cars stopped behind him. So by the second lap of the virtual safety car he had a fairly clear window behind. And what's interesting is they waited until after the VSC, several laps after the VSC, 3 laps, in order to stop with Kimi. But it does something interesting. If you stopped under the virtual safety car, he would have been out and he would have been in a great position relative to Ricciardo and Perez, for example. But they would not have stopped and reacted to him because there's nothing they can do about it at that point if you wait to the second lap of the VSC. And he would have gone on, but it would have been a very long stint to be doing at that point in time on that one-stop race, 15 all the way to the end. With Ricciardo and Perez, they would have continued on and probably tried an optimum one-stop, a bit like Esteban did in the Force India, and potentially Kimi would have been compromised at the end of the race. What they did with Kimi forced Ricciardo and Perez to cover him. So they forced them to come in 18, 19 in order to put themselves out of position. And what's interesting about that is whilst Kimi didn't get the positions from them, if they were thinking of going into the race, trying a two-stop and forcing other people on a compromise one, they did exactly the right thing. So the balance isn't clear. You could stop under the VSC and definitely get a P3, but on a compromise one-stop, or wait and force other people to react and try a two-stop strategy. And they went for the latter of the two. But it was an interesting clinch point of the race.
So it was good to see Force India running the top 10 on the weekend. Could they have done any better?
It's a good question. First of all, striking colour with that pink, and you can see it on track, you can see it on the pure pit wall display. They had the opportunity to fight for a podium this weekend. They had the opportunity to fight for a P3. It was a difficult race for them. With Perez, they covered off Kimi. Kimi stopped early on, which was on purpose trying to force the cars to this very compromised one stop. And with Esteban, they kept him out for a long, long period of time to try and see if they could pull them ahead of Kimi. He very nearly did it. He had Valtteri behind him, and he was within half a second or so of making the gap to Kimi, but didn't quite get it, dropped out behind. Kimi converted to that two-stop strategy, which, as I said, that was a planned strategy by Ferrari. And that now left a situation where Esteban was on much younger tyres than Perez, both cars tucked up behind Ricciardo, but Perez not able to overtake. The team tried to invert the cars to give the team the best opportunity at the podium, but weren't successful in that action. However, the team should have then boxed Perez. If they boxed Perez, they would have come out ahead of Kimi just after he stopped. And that would have put them in the situation that they've removed the options from Ferrari. Ferrari now have a car that's going to be out there on 60-lap-old tyres at the end of the race. Very compromised car. We saw Grosjean make it, but it's not the fastest race. And if Vettel boxes, he now comes out behind Perez. That's a complicated decision. It leaves Esteban trying to attack Ricciardo for that podium, for that P3. And if he's not successful, Perez would have caught back up again and allowed him a chance to attack with much fresher tyres Ricciardo at the end of the race. So that would have generated good opportunity for Force India, potentially a podium, but it's difficult to say.
It was another really strong weekend for the pit crew, with some amazing pit stops. Did that have any impact at all on the race overall?
I mean, you always want the best pit stops we can achieve. In the situation here, the extra tenth or two didn't make the overall impact on the race. But what's important for me is that we can achieve it time and time again. It's been many times this year that we've been in the top three, and that's extremely important for consistency. You saw Stroll, fastest overall, 22.7 on the pit lane time. That was a very fast stop, very fast stop. I think it was around a 2.1 stationary. Ours were around 2 seconds green light time, so around about a 2.3 stationary. So just a couple of tenths offset, which is what that plot shows. But it's the consistency we're achieving that I'm very proud of.
That was another great weekend for the team. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.